Good evening. You are watching Silent Waves, and we want to be absolutely transparent with you from the very first second of this broadcast. What we are about to report to you is not a drill, not a simulation, and not a test of the emergency broadcast system. I am Alex Mercer. Alongside me tonight is my co-anchor, Sierra Lane. We have been on the air for approximately 40 minutes now, coordinating with our production team to verify what we are seeing across multiple wire services. And I want to tell you plainly, we have confirmed through 3 independent governmental sources that NATO ground forces have crossed into sovereign United States territory. The entry point, as best we can determine at this hour, is along a northeastern corridor involving the Canadian border, specifically in the regions surrounding the state of Vermont and portions of upstate New York. We do not have an official White House statement at this time. The Pentagon has not issued a formal press release. What we do have are eyewitness accounts, intercepted emergency frequencies, and a confirmed communique from the Office of NATO's Supreme Allied Commander Europe, the contents of which we will read to you verbatim momentarily. We are approximately 40 minutes into what I can only describe as the most significant geopolitical crisis to occur on American soil within living memory. Stay with us.
Alex, I want to take a moment, before we get into the mechanics of troop movements and border coordinates, to speak to the people watching right now. I know many of you have family in Vermont, in New York, in Maine, along that northeastern stretch of the country. I know your phones are ringing. I know your group chats are exploding. I know you are sitting in your living rooms with a sick feeling in your stomach that you cannot quite name yet. That feeling is real and it is valid. What we are watching unfold tonight is something that, for generations of Americans, existed only as the plot of a novel or a film. Foreign military boots on domestic American soil. And while we are going to give you every piece of verified information we have the moment we have it, I also want you to know that we will not abandon the human dimension of this story. Behind every coordinate on a map, there are people. Families sitting at kitchen tables. Children who are supposed to go to school tomorrow. Elderly residents in small Vermont towns who are watching the same broadcast you are and wondering what this means for them. We are going to tell their stories too throughout this broadcast because that is the truth of what is happening.
We now have the text of the NATO communique, and I want to read it in full. It reads as follows. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, acting under emergency provisions within Article 7 of the Washington Treaty, and in response to a formal request submitted by the Provisional Emergency Council of the United States government, has authorized and commenced a stabilization operation on North American soil. This action is limited in scope, humanitarian in primary purpose, and is not to be construed as an act of aggression or conquest. NATO forces entering United States territory do so at the invitation of recognized governmental authority and will operate under strict rules of engagement designed to minimize civilian disruption. All NATO member states affirm their commitment to the sovereignty, dignity, and territorial integrity of the United States of America. That is the complete text, and I want to unpack a few phrases there because the language is extraordinarily deliberate. The phrase, Provisional Emergency Council of the United States Government, is one we have never heard before. It is not a body recognized under the Constitution. It suggests, and I want to emphasize the word suggests, because we are not yet in a position to confirm that some form of governance disruption has occurred at the federal level. We do not yet know where the sitting president is. We do not know where Congress is assembled, if it is assembled at all.
And that is the part that is hardest to sit with, isn't it? The not knowing. I've been receiving messages on our broadcast line since we went live, and I want to read some of them to you because they are telling. This one comes from a viewer who signs their name only as Margaret from Burlington. She writes, I can see military vehicles on Route 2, They have flags I don't recognize, but they're driving slowly, and there are soldiers on foot. They're not doing anything, but people are standing on their porches watching. My neighbor called the sheriff, and he said he already knows. He didn't say anything else. I don't know what to do. My grandchildren are here for the week. Margaret, we hear you. Please stay inside. Keep your doors locked as a precaution and continue watching. Another message here from a man who identifies himself as a trucker on Interstate 89, parked at a rest stop near Montpelier. He writes, "Road ahead is blocked. Military checkpoint. I showed my commercial license and they waved me to the shoulder. There are Canadian soldiers here too. I can tell by the patches. They're polite, haven't drawn weapons, but there are a lot of them. These on-the-ground accounts are being logged by our team and cross-referenced. They are consistent."
Let me give you the technical and logistical picture as we understand it at this hour. And we are approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes into this broadcast now. The force that has entered U.S. territory appears to consist of at least 3 NATO member nation contingents. We have confirmed the presence of Canadian Armed Forces elements, consistent with what that trucker described. We have second-hand confirmation of British Army units operating in a support capacity near the border crossing at Highgate Springs, Vermont. That is a port of entry on the U.S.-Canada border along Interstate 89, for those unfamiliar with the geography. There are also unverified but credible reports of French Foreign Legion reconnaissance units operating further south toward the New York border. The total force estimate, and I want to be clear, this is preliminary, ranges from 8,000 to potentially 20,000 personnel. That range is wide because we simply do not have aerial surveillance data at this moment. Both commercial flight tracking services and civilian air traffic in the northeastern corridor have been suspended. The FAA has issued a Notice to Air Missions, a NOTAM, designating the entire airspace above Vermont, northern New York, northern New Hampshire, and western Maine as a temporary flight restriction zone. That is roughly 68,000 square miles of restricted airspace, effective immediately.
We're getting reports now, and I'm reading this off our wire feed in real time, that several Vermont State Police dispatchers have stopped answering calls. Not because they're not there, but because the call volume has overwhelmed the system. The 911 infrastructure in at least 4 Vermont counties is experiencing what officials are calling saturation failure. That means ordinary citizens trying to reach emergency services cannot get through. Hospitals in Burlington, Rutland, and St. Johnsbury have activated what's called an elevated alert protocol. That's the step below a full disaster declaration. And they're asking non-emergency patients to stay home. We have word from the Burlington Medical Center's communications director, who released a brief statement moments ago saying, quote, "Our facility is fully operational and secure. We are asking the public to remain calm and to reserve emergency services for life-threatening situations only." I want to speak to the anxiety that statement will cause, because telling people to remain calm in a moment like this is both necessary and almost impossible. The human nervous system is not designed for this kind of abstract, pervasive uncertainty. What we know from previous large-scale emergencies, from natural disasters, from civil unrest, is that the first hours are the hours of the highest psychological strain before the shape of the crisis becomes clear. People are managing an enormous amount of fear right now with very little information.
I want to walk viewers through the timeline of what we believe precipitated this event, to the best of our investigative ability. Approximately 72 hours before tonight, our diplomatic desk began picking up unusual signals out of Washington. Congressional sessions were abruptly closed. The White House press briefing scheduled for midweek was canceled without explanation. Satellite imagery analysts who contribute to independent security publications noticed unusual military movement at several domestic installations, including Fort Drum in New York, which notably sits fewer than 50 miles from the Canadian border, and Plattsburgh Air Reserve Station, which has been technically inactive for decades, but showed what analysts described as anomalous thermal signatures consistent with generator activity. At the same time, and this is the piece that has not been widely reported until now, 7 NATO ambassadors simultaneously returned to their home capitals from Washington over a 48-hour period. That kind of synchronized diplomatic departure is not coincidental. It is, in the language of international relations, a signal. It says, something is about to change, and we do not want our people in the vicinity.
Alex, we're getting new information coming in now. We're 2 hours into this broadcast. I want to share it with our viewers. We're receiving reports that power has gone out across a substantial portion of the Vermont electrical grid. Specifically, Green Mountain Power, which serves approximately 260,000 customers across the state, has posted a message on its emergency line saying that substations in Chittenden, Washington, and Lamoille counties are offline. That represents the greater Burlington area, the state capital of Montpelier, and the rural hill towns in between. We also have a viewer in Montpelier, I'll call him David, who writes, "The street lights went out maybe 20 minutes ago. People are coming out of their houses. It's not cold enough to be dangerous yet, but it's October and it will be cold tonight. There are families with kids on the street just kind of standing there not knowing what to do. Someone's handing out candles from a church across the road." David, that image, a church handing out candles in a darkened street, is the kind of human reality that gets lost when we talk about infrastructure failures in the abstract. This is what a power outage means. It means a family in Montpelier standing on their porch in the October dark holding a candle.
We have just received what we believe to be a partial communication from a federal source. I want to be careful here because I cannot yet verify the identity of the individual who transmitted this. But the metadata and the channel through which it arrived are consistent with legitimate federal emergency management infrastructure. The communication reads as follows. Continuity of government protocols are active. National command authority functions are being maintained through distributed nodes. Citizens should treat communications from state and local governments as authoritative in the absence of federal direction. This is not a foreign invasion. Repeat, this is not a foreign invasion. NATO engagement is consensual and limited. The phrase distributed nodes in the context of continuity of government refers to secure, pre-designated alternate command facilities, hardened bunkers and secondary command centers that the U.S. government has maintained since the Cold War era for exactly this kind of scenario. There are dozens of such facilities scattered throughout the Appalachian mountain range, the most famous being the Raven Rock Mountain Complex in Pennsylvania and the Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center in Virginia. The fact that COG protocols are active is significant. It means the federal government, in whatever form it is currently operating, anticipated this situation far enough in advance to activate those protocols.
We're going to take a moment to acknowledge something that our viewers deserve to have acknowledged directly. The information landscape tonight is terrifying in its inconsistency. We are seeing social media posts claiming all manner of things. That this is a coup, that this is a response to a coup, that nuclear facilities have been seized, that there is fighting in Washington. I want to be honest with you. We cannot confirm any of those things. What I can confirm is that the temptation to share unverified information in moments of crisis is almost overwhelming, and we are going to resist that temptation even when silence feels inadequate. What I can also confirm is that we have spoken to a Red Cross regional coordinator in New Hampshire, who told our producer just minutes ago that the organization is pre-positioning emergency supply caches, food, water, blankets, medical kits, at distribution points in cities including Concord, Manchester, and Portsmouth. That is not done casually. That is the action of an organization that believes a significant disruption of normal services is imminent in the broader region. She also said, and this stuck with me, our volunteers are showing up. In every single city, people are showing up.
It is now 3 hours and approximately 20 minutes since we first went to air with this story. Let me update the casualty picture, such as it is. We want to be precise and honest. Confirmed casualties remain low at this hour, and the vast majority appear to be related to accidents and medical events triggered by the panic rather than direct military engagement. Vermont Emergency Management reports 2 confirmed traffic fatalities on Interstate 91 southbound near the town of St. Johnsbury, where a mass evacuation attempt created a gridlock situation resulting in a multi-vehicle accident. There are 11 individuals confirmed hospitalized from that incident, 3 of them in serious condition. We have 1 additional confirmed fatality in Burlington, a 67-year-old man believed to have suffered a cardiac event during the initial confusion of the power outage. His name has not been released. There are also reports of sporadic injuries, broken bones, lacerations, consistent with crowd-related incidents in the towns of Swanton and Highgate Springs, which are directly adjacent to the border crossings. No confirmed deaths attributable to direct military action at this time. I want that to be clear, and I want us to return to it throughout this broadcast as a baseline.
We're also hearing from viewers in states far from the northeastern border, and I think that's important to note. We have messages coming in from Georgia, from Texas, from California, people who are watching this broadcast from thousands of miles away and experiencing their own version of this fear. A woman named Rosa, writing from Houston, says, "My son is at college in Maine. I can't reach him. His phone goes straight to voicemail. I've been trying for 2 hours. I don't know what to do." Rosa, the communications infrastructure in northern New England is under severe stress right now, but cell towers and landlines are not confirmed as disabled. The volume of simultaneous calls is causing network saturation, which means calls are failing not because the towers are down, but because every tower in the region is attempting to process 10 times its normal load. Your son is very likely fine, trying to reach you as desperately as you are trying to reach him. Please, keep trying. Another message here from a retired military officer in Virginia, he doesn't give his name, who writes, "I served in NATO operations for 22 years. What you're describing matches a rapid stabilization deployment protocol to the letter. This is not an attack. Someone in Washington requested this." That perspective from someone with direct operational experience is worth hearing.
And that brings us to the central question that our diplomatic and political analysts have been working on since we began this broadcast. Why? What chain of events, what internal crisis within the United States government could produce a situation in which a formal request for NATO military assistance was submitted and granted? We have, as of this hour, 3 working hypotheses. The first, and in some ways the most disturbing, is that a significant breakdown of civilian governmental authority occurred, whether through some form of internal political seizure, a constitutional crisis of unprecedented magnitude, or a collapse of federal administrative function that rendered the executive branch unable to perform its national security functions. The second hypothesis is that this is a preemptive stabilization operation triggered by an imminent domestic threat that has not yet been made public, a threat of sufficient scale that federal authorities determined unilaterally that they lacked the internal resources to manage it. The third hypothesis, and the one that some analysts on our team find most credible given the consensual language in the NATO communique, is that this was a planned and negotiated transition of security authority, however temporary, executed under the cover of a fabricated crisis. We do not know which of these is true. We are telling you all 3 because you deserve to know the full range of possibilities being considered by serious analysts.
We're now approaching the 4-hour mark. The scope of this situation is beginning to stretch beyond Vermont and New York. We have confirmed reports of NATO naval vessels, at least 4 frigates under British and Dutch flags, positioned in international waters off the coast of Maine, roughly 40 miles east of Portland. The Portland Harbor Authority has issued a closure notice describing the port as temporarily restricted pending federal authorization. The Maine Port Authority has confirmed this closure but offered no further explanation. For context, Portland Harbor is one of the busiest crude oil import terminals on the East Coast. Its closure, even temporary, will ripple through the regional fuel supply chain within days. We are also receiving unconfirmed reports of similar NATO naval posturing off the coast of Virginia, near the entrance to the Chesapeake Bay. If those reports are accurate, it would suggest a much broader operational perimeter than the land-based activity in the Northeast alone. Our military analysts, and I should note we are not bringing any guest experts on air tonight, we are using our own in-house resources, has flagged that a naval presence at both the Northeast Corridor and the Chesapeake would be consistent with a doctrine of graduated perimeter establishment, which is military doctrine for securing the outer edges of an operational zone before moving inward.
I want to give our viewers an updated picture of the evacuation situation, because it is becoming a significant story in itself. Vermont's governor, whose office issued a brief statement approximately 90 minutes ago urging calm and compliance with all lawful instructions, has not been seen publicly or on camera. The Lieutenant Governor of Vermont has appeared on a local Montpelier radio station and confirmed that state government operations are continuing, that the state legislature has convened in an emergency session, and that National Guard units, which would normally be activated in this situation, have been and I'm quoting directly, stood down pending clarification of command authority. That phrase, stood down pending clarification of command authority, tells you something critically important. It means the Vermont National Guard received orders, possibly conflicting orders, and rather than act on either set, they stopped. That kind of command paralysis at the state militia level is extremely unusual and suggests the breakdown in federal command is being felt all the way down through the military chain. Meanwhile, voluntary evacuations from border counties in Vermont are creating serious congestion on every southbound route. I-89 toward Concord, New Hampshire is at a complete standstill south of Montpelier. Route 2 through the Green Mountains is moving at approximately 8 miles per hour. Route 9 near Brattleboro is reportedly passable, but gasoline stations along that corridor have begun to run out of fuel due to panic purchasing.
I want to read you something. This was sent to our broadcast line by a woman who describes herself as a teacher at an elementary school in Swanton, Vermont. Swanton is essentially on the Canadian border. She writes, "We kept the kids in the building for 3 extra hours today because the parents couldn't come. We had no information, no direction, nothing from the district. We just kept them calm. We read books, we played games. We told them the grown-ups were handling it. Eventually, every single child was picked up. The last one left at 8:30 tonight. I hugged every parent who walked through that door. Some of them were crying before they even got inside." I'm going to take a breath here because that is what this situation looks like from the inside. A teacher in a border town holding a classroom of frightened children together with books and games and a steady voice because that was what the moment required. That is human courage in one of its purest forms. It doesn't carry a weapon. It doesn't make headlines. But it is the thing that holds a community together when the larger systems fail.
We are 6 hours into this broadcast. I want to take stock of what we know and what we don't. What we know, NATO ground forces, totaling what our sources now estimate at approximately 35,000 personnel, have crossed into U.S. territory from Canada at multiple points spanning from Highgate Springs, Vermont westward, to the Thousand Islands region of New York, where the St. Lawrence River forms the border. We know that a naval perimeter has been established off the coasts of Maine and, now confirmed, Virginia. We know that federal civilian authority is operating in a disrupted state from alternate locations. We know that power and communications are severely degraded in northern Vermont and portions of northern New York. The confirmed death toll stands at 4, 2 traffic fatalities on I-91, the cardiac event in Burlington, and now one additional death reported in Plattsburgh, New York. A man who died when his vehicle went off the road, attempting to turn around at a military checkpoint in the dark. 14 individuals remain hospitalized in the greater Burlington area. What we do not know, the location of the sitting president and senior cabinet members, the precise chain of events that led to the NATO request, the full extent and duration of the planned NATO operation, whether any opposing U.S. military forces intend to resist, and what this means for the rest of the country, for those of you watching from the South, the Midwest, the West Coast, who are not yet feeling the direct physical effects of what is happening, but who are feeling it deeply in every other way.
I want to address something that is circulating heavily on social media right now. And I know many of our viewers are also looking at their phones and seeing the same things, which is the idea that cities far from the Northeast should begin preparing for direct military activity in their areas. I want to be clear about what we do and do not have evidence of, because the last thing we want to do is accelerate panic in communities that are not in the path of this operation. We have no confirmed reports of NATO activity south of Albany, New York, or west of Buffalo. What we do have are reports of extraordinary precautionary measures being taken by local governments across the country. Chicago has activated its Office of Emergency Management and Communications and issued a shelter-in-place advisory for residents of the downtown Loop District. Los Angeles has placed its emergency response teams on standby. The mayors of Atlanta, Houston, and Philadelphia have all issued brief public statements urging residents to monitor official channels, avoid unnecessary travel, and ensure they have emergency supplies on hand. These are precautionary measures. They are not evidence that NATO forces are approaching those cities, but they are evidence that every major urban government in America is treating the situation as the most serious national emergency in modern history.
Let me update the infrastructure picture as we stand at 7 hours into this event. In addition to the Vermont power outages previously reported, we are now seeing cascading effects. The New England power grid, which interconnects the electrical systems of all 6 New England states, plus portions of New York, has entered what grid operators call a stress condition. That is 2 levels below a formal grid emergency, but it means operators are already shedding load and making difficult decisions about where power goes. Boston is currently fully powered, but operators have confirmed that rolling outages affecting smaller cities in Massachusetts and Connecticut are possible within the next 12 to 18 hours if the Vermont substations are not restored. On the communications side, AT&T and Verizon have both confirmed that their network infrastructure in Vermont and northern New York is operating at reduced capacity due to exceptional demand. Translation: the system is not broken, it is overwhelmed. The Federal Aviation Administration's no-TAM restriction on northeastern airspace has now been extended to include all of New Hampshire, the upper half of Maine, and a buffer zone extending out over the Atlantic. Logan International Airport in Boston is operating normally, but flights to and from any airport north of Boston are indefinitely suspended. That affects Burlington International, Manchester Boston Regional, and Portland International Jetport.
We're 8 hours in now, and I want to tell you about something that happened in a small town called Johnson, Vermont, that our producer found on a local community Facebook page before internet service in that area became unreliable. A man named Frank, who runs a hardware store in Johnson, posted that he had unlocked his store, turned on his generator-powered lights, and put every battery, flashlight, blanket, and camp stove he had on a table out front with a handwritten sign that said, "Take what you need, pay me later or don't, be safe." He wrote in the post, "I've got enough, my neighbors might not." Within 2 hours, according to comments on that post, people had come from all over the county. They took batteries and left canned food. They took blankets and left notes. Someone left an envelope with $60 cash with a note that said, "Keep this for the next person." That post has been shared over 40,000 times before the signal went down. There's something in that story about who people actually are when the structure falls away. Not the worst thing. Not always. Sometimes the best thing. Sometimes people open their hardware stores in the dark and say, "Take what you need."
We now have our first confirmed statement from a NATO operational commander. British Army Brigadier General, the name we are given is Hargreaves, has communicated through the official NATO channel that, and I quote, "All NATO personnel operating within the United States are under strict orders to treat all American civilians with absolute respect and dignity. No weapons are to be discharged except in direct self-defense against armed attack. All checkpoint detentions are to last no longer than 15 minutes without cause. Humanitarian assistance is to be offered proactively at all NATO positions." He further states that NATO forces have been, quote, "formally coordinating with state and local law enforcement at every location, and we have found those interactions to be cooperative and professional." That last point is significant. It suggests that at the local level, at least, police and emergency services are working alongside NATO forces rather than opposing them, which would be consistent with the picture we've been building from viewer accounts throughout this broadcast. Soldiers who are polite, who are moving slowly and deliberately, who are not acting like an invading force acts in the imagination. They are acting like something more complicated, something we don't quite have a name for yet.
The humanitarian situation is becoming more serious as we approach the 9-hour mark. The Vermont Food Bank has released a statement saying that their warehouse in Williston, just outside Burlington, has been contacted by at least 60 community organizations in the past 8 hours requesting emergency food distribution support. They write, "We are coordinating with the Vermont Agency of Agriculture and our regional partners to establish distribution sites across all 14 Vermont counties. We expect those sites to be operational within the next 18 hours. 14 counties. The entire state. That is a full-scale humanitarian operation being stood up in real time. We are also hearing from school districts across Vermont and northern New York that they are formally canceling school for the foreseeable future and activating their emergency communication trees. The Chittenden County School District, that's the Burlington area, the most populous county in Vermont, has put out a message asking parents to call a specific hotline for information on students who may not have been picked up. The message ends with these words, "Every child in our care is safe. We will not leave until every child is home." I keep coming back to that. Teachers, bus drivers, school secretaries, the people we pay least and depend on most showing up in the dark.
At the 10-hour mark, we are receiving our first confirmed reports of activity south of the initial northeastern corridor. Military vehicles bearing NATO identification have been observed on Interstate 87 south of Plattsburgh, New York. That highway runs directly south toward Albany, and beyond that, New York City. The distance from Plattsburgh to Albany is approximately 150 miles. The distance from Albany to New York City is approximately 150 additional miles. This does not mean NATO forces are heading to New York City. They may well be establishing a supply line, a communication route, or simply maintaining visible presence in a corridor to ensure it remains passable. But I want to give you the fact plainly. There are NATO vehicles on I-87 south of Plattsburgh, New York, and they are moving south. The New York State Police have issued a traffic advisory for I-87 south of exit 40, that's the Plattsburgh exit, asking all civilian traffic to move to the breakdown lane when military convoys approach and to yield the right-of-way. The advisory is remarkably calm. It reads like a snow emergency advisory. That, in its own way, is one of the strangest aspects of this entire situation. The degree to which the official posture has been one of deliberate, almost forced normalcy, as if the goal is to prevent the situation from becoming something worse by refusing to describe it, as what it appears to be.
We have a message from a man named Thomas in Albany, New York. He writes, "I'm watching from my apartment window. I can see people in the streets. Some are just walking around looking up at the sky. My neighbor knocked on my door and asked if I had extra food. I gave her half a bag of rice and a can of chickpeas. She started crying. I didn't really know what to say, so I just said it was going to be okay, even though I don't know if it is. She said she believed me. I think she just needed someone to say it." Thomas, that exchange, a bag of rice and a can of chickpeas and the words, "it's going to be okay," that is not a small thing. That is a person choosing to extend themselves toward another human being in a moment of mutual fear. That is what we mean when we talk about the fabric of a society. It is not the large institutions. It is not the governments or the armies. It is Thomas and his neighbor at a door in Albany and the half bag of rice and the lie that was also a kindness.
12 hours. We are 12 hours into this broadcast, and I want to give you an updated and comprehensive picture of where things stand. The confirmed casualty number has risen. I want to be precise. Confirmed deaths attributable to the events of this evening now stand at 17. The breakdown is as follows: 4 in Vermont, including the earlier cases I described, and 2 additional individuals. 1 a man who suffered a fatal fall while attempting to move belongings from a second-floor apartment in the dark, and 1 a woman who died in a traffic accident on Route 15 near Morrisville. 6 in New York State, all traffic-related, all occurring on the major evacuation routes. 2 in New Hampshire, again, traffic accidents, and 5 in the broader region of Maine, Massachusetts, and Connecticut combined, all associated with accidents. 1 cardiac event, and 1 fatal fall. These are not deaths from military action. There has been, to our knowledge, no exchange of fire between NATO forces and anyone. The 17 deaths are the human cost of chaos, of darkness, of panic moving at 70 miles an hour on a congested interstate. They are preventable deaths, which makes them harder, in some ways, not easier. Over 200 individuals are currently hospitalized across the affected states with injuries of varying severity. The most serious cluster is at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center in Lebanon, New Hampshire, which has declared a full hospital emergency and called in all off-duty staff.
We are also hearing for the first time from voices outside the United States. The BBC World Service, which we have been monitoring, is carrying this story with the banner, "Constitutional Crisis in America, NATO Intervenes." The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's anchor, in their top-of-hour update, described the situation as the most unprecedented activation of the NATO alliance's stabilization provisions since the alliance's founding. They also reported, and this is the first we are hearing of this, that the Canadian government has confirmed its own military's participation in the operation and characterized it as a response to a formal request for fraternal assistance from allied partners within the United States government, which precisely mirrors the language in the NATO communique and suggests a coordinated communication strategy. In France, the government has issued a statement of support for the operation. Germany's chancellor released a brief statement calling for calm, transparency, and a swift restoration of democratic governance. The United Kingdom's Prime Minister said that British forces involved in the operation act in the spirit of the special relationship and with deep respect for the American people. From Russia, complete silence. From China, a single-sentence statement. We are observing developments and call on all parties to protect civilian life. Those 2 silences are, in their own way, as eloquent as any statement.
I want to address the federal communication vacuum more directly, because it is 14 hours now, and we still have not heard directly from the President, the Vice President, or any Cabinet Secretary. We have heard from the Governor of New Hampshire, who has spoken calmly and directly to his constituents and confirmed that state government in Concord is fully operational. We've heard from New York's governor, who has declared a state of emergency for all counties north of Albany and deployed state resources, including National Guard. New York's National Guard appears not to have received the same stand-down order that Vermont's received, which is worth noting as a potential divergence in the federal communication breakdown. We've heard from the mayors of Burlington, Plattsburgh, and Portland, all of whom have been visible and vocal. But from the federal level, nothing. No face, no voice. The White House website is displaying an error message. The official presidential social media accounts have not been updated in 31 hours. FEMA's website is operational and directing people to state resources, but there is no new federal declaration, no new federal guidance. The government of the most powerful nation in the history of the world is, in terms of its public face, simply absent. And in that absence, every rumor grows.
I want to share something that I think reflects the extraordinary nature of this moment in a way that the hard numbers and the geopolitical analysis cannot quite reach. We've been receiving messages from people all across the country who are doing what humans have always done in darkness. They are gathering. A message from a woman named Priya in Boston. My building had a meeting in the lobby tonight. We pooled flashlights and phone chargers, and one neighbor has a crank radio. We've been listening together. There are 12 of us around a coffee table in the lobby of an apartment building in Boston at 2 a.m. We brought our kids. Someone made tea. We're listening to your broadcast. A message from a man in rural Vermont near the town of Craftsbury. There's no signal here, so this might not even reach you, but I wrote it to send when the signal comes back. Tonight, my entire road, 12 houses, had dinner together at the Hendersons' place. We dragged tables into their barn. People brought whatever they had. We ate for 3 hours. Someone played fiddle. I thought about how we've been neighbors for 15 years and some of us have never had dinner together. It took this. That's the paradox of crisis, isn't it? It strips away everything convenient and leaves only what's essential. And sometimes what's essential turns out to be the neighbor you've never really met.
It is now 16 hours into this broadcast. I want to update the geographic scope of what we are tracking because it has expanded significantly in the past 2 hours. We have now confirmed NATO military presence in the following locations: the northeastern corridor from Vermont to upstate New York, as previously reported. Albany, New York, where advanced units have established a forward operating post at the Albany International Airport. The airport itself is closed to civilian traffic, but is being used as a logistics hub. Coastal Maine, where naval landing craft have come ashore at a beach near Kittery. Kittery is on the Maine-New Hampshire border, at the mouth of the Piscataqua River. Those forces have moved inland to secure the Portsmouth, New Hampshire area, which is of strategic significance because of Naval Station Portsmouth and the Pease Air National Guard base located there. We also have unconfirmed reports, and I want to emphasize these are unconfirmed, but from sources who have been reliable on other data points tonight, of NATO Special Operations units operating in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Not in the city itself, as best we can determine, but in the surrounding suburban counties of Northern Virginia and Southern Maryland. If those reports are accurate, the scope of this operation is not a regional northeastern operation. It is a national one.
We have received a message that I want to read carefully and completely because it is extraordinary. It comes from someone who identifies herself only as a nurse at a major hospital in the D.C. area. She writes, "I cannot say where I work or my name. I am writing this from a break room. Our facility is fully operational. We have been told by hospital administration that federal health emergency protocols are now in effect, which means our patient intake criteria have changed, and we are treating all incoming patients regardless of insurance, documentation, or residency status. I have personally treated 4 individuals today with injuries consistent with blunt force trauma who were not willing to discuss how they received those injuries and who left before we could fully document their cases. I want people to know, we are here. We are open. The doors are open. Whatever happened out there, We are here. I am sitting with the weight of that message and what it may imply, and I am also sitting with the last lines. We are here. The doors are open. It is not the first time tonight that ordinary workers in ordinary buildings have said those words. It will not be the last.
18 hours. The casualty count has continued to climb, and I want to give you the most current figures we have. Confirmed deaths now stand at 41. That number has nearly tripled from the 12-hour update. And I want to explain why. Because the cause of those additional deaths matters. 9 of the new deaths have occurred in the Vermont-New York corridor and are associated with a collision involving an evacuation convoy on I-87 in which a fuel tanker was involved. There was a fire. The incident involved approximately 30 vehicles, and first responders were delayed in reaching the scene due to road congestion and conflicting priority calls. 24 individuals from that incident were hospitalized, 11 in critical condition. The remaining new deaths are distributed across the region. Cardiac events, a structure fire in Burlington that went undetected for too long because the fire dispatch system was overwhelmed, and 2 deaths in northern Maine from exposure, 2 elderly individuals who lost heat when the power went out and were not found until morning. The 41 number is, in the terrible arithmetic of mass crisis, still relatively low. But each of those 41 people was someone's entire world.
Let me share some light in the midst of that. I want to tell you about something that is happening right now in Burlington, Vermont, despite everything. The University of Vermont Medical Center, which is the largest hospital in the state and has been working at elevated capacity all night, posted on its public communications board that their cafeteria staff has been cooking continuously for 20 hours and has been sending food packages to the families waiting in the hospital lobby and to the National Guardsmen stationed outside. The chef, a man identified only as Chef Marco, was quoted in the Post as saying, "These people are scared. Food doesn't fix that, but it does something. It says you're still here, we still see you, have some soup." There's also a story out of St. Johnsbury, the town hit hard by the I-91 accident early in this broadcast, where after the wreckage was cleared, a group of local residents who came to help at the scene stayed through the night and organized a collection point for travelers who were stranded and couldn't continue south. They set up cots in a church gymnasium. There are reportedly over 200 people sleeping there right now who were strangers 12 hours ago. The pastor of that church, whose name is not given, said to a local radio reporter, "We have room. We always have room."
20 hours into this broadcast, I want to share a significant development. The first official communication from what appears to be a recognized federal authority has emerged. It is an audio recording, not live, not video, but audio, that was broadcast simultaneously on FEMA's Emergency Alert Channel, on all active AM radio frequencies in the United States, and on several shortwave frequencies used by the government's emergency broadcast infrastructure. The voice on the recording has been confirmed by 3 voice analysis services as that of the current United States Secretary of Defense. The recording is 47 seconds long. It says, "Citizens of the United States of America, the events of the past 24 hours have been extraordinary, and you deserve a full accounting of them. That accounting is coming. What I can tell you now is this. The constitutional government of the United States is intact. Democratic institutions are intact. The military chain of command is intact. NATO forces operating in the northeastern and mid-Atlantic regions of the country are doing so in full coordination with U.S. military and civilian authorities, and will begin a phased withdrawal once conditions on the ground allow. You have not been conquered. You have not been overthrown. You are going through something unlike anything in our nation's history, and we will explain it fully and we will emerge from it. Stay home. Stay safe. Trust your local officials. This is not the end. This is not the end. The recording ends there.
This is not the end. I've been sitting with those words for the last 20 minutes while Alex updated the tactical picture, and I want to talk about what they mean to people who have been awake for 20 hours, who have been scared and in the dark and reaching for any fragment of certainty. Because whether or not you trust the source of that message, whether or not you believe the full accounting is coming, or believe what it says about constitutional continuity, those words, "This is not the end," reach something biological. They reach the part of us that just needs to be told we will survive. And there is something worth acknowledging in that. The power of a voice, of a statement, of a presence that says, "We see you and you are not alone and this will continue." It is not a policy. It is not a strategy. It is something older than both of those things. It is the reason human beings have told each other stories around fires since the beginning. Because the voice in the dark saying, "It's not the end," is sometimes the most important thing.
At 21 hours, we are beginning to see the first signs of what might be described as stabilization in the operational zone. NATO forces have established a continuous, clearly marked perimeter line running roughly from the city of Burlington in the west to the city of Portsmouth, New Hampshire in the east, a line that appears to represent the southern edge of their operational zone. Below that line, civilian life, while dramatically disrupted, is beginning to resume some aspects of normalcy. Power has been restored to approximately 60% of the affected Vermont grid. Interstate 89 southbound, which had been in near total gridlock through the night, is now moving at reduced but functional speeds as military traffic managers, NATO engineers working alongside Vermont State Police, have established coordinated traffic management points at key interchanges. Boston's Logan Airport has resumed limited domestic operations, handling emergency medical flights and supply aircraft first. The gas stations along the Vermont-New Hampshire border that ran dry through the night are being resupplied through a coordinated effort involving the New Hampshire National Guard and the region's fuel distribution network.
It's 22 hours into this broadcast, and I want to tell you about a family in Highgate Springs, Vermont, right on the Canadian border, one of the first towns that NATO forces moved through. Their name, shared with us through our viewer message line, is the Moreau family. The father, a dairy farmer, writes, "NATO soldiers came to the gate of our farm at around 4 this morning, more than 12 hours ago now. There were 6 of them. They asked if they could use our barn to rest for an hour. We said yes. They asked if we needed anything. My wife offered them coffee. They accepted. They sat in our kitchen and drank coffee, and my youngest daughter, who is 9, asked one of the soldiers, a young British man, she said he was from Leeds, if he was scared. He said he was nervous. She said nervous and scared are the same thing. He laughed. They left after an hour and said, 'Thank you, ma'am,' to my wife. A British soldier in my wife's kitchen in Highgate Springs, Vermont, saying, 'Thank you, ma'am.' He ends the message. I don't understand what's happening. I don't know if I should be afraid or not. But they drank the coffee, and they were polite, and they didn't take anything, and they left. That's what I know."
We are approaching the 23-hour mark. Let me give you the most comprehensive status update of this broadcast. The overall death toll from the events of the past 23 hours stands at 63 confirmed deaths. Of those 63, 0 are attributable to direct military engagement. All 63 deaths are attributable to the cascading consequences of the crisis: traffic accidents, medical emergencies, 1 structure fire, and 2 exposure deaths. Approximately 412 individuals are hospitalized across the affected states, ranging from minor injuries to critical. Infrastructure status. Power is being progressively restored to affected areas. Approximately 70% of the Vermont grid is back online. Communications networks remain stressed, but functional in most areas. Portland Harbor remains closed, but preliminary indications from the Coast Guard suggest a reopening assessment will occur within 12 hours. All major interstate highways in the northeastern corridor are open, but under traffic management protocols. The airports remain closed north of Boston, but a partial reopening of Burlington International Airport is being discussed for humanitarian supply flights.
As we come to the final hour of our first 24 hours on air, I want to speak to what endures. Because there is a question that has been underneath every message we've received, every story we've shared, every number Alex has read. What does this mean for who we are, not as a government, not as a military power, not as a geopolitical entity, but as a people? And I don't think any honest answer can be delivered tonight, because the honest answer is still being written by the woman in Boston sitting with her neighbors around a coffee table, and by Frank, the hardware store owner in Johnson, and by the teacher in Swanton who stayed until every child went home. What I can say is this: the things that held tonight were not what you might expect. Not the federal government, which went quiet, not the military command structure, which fractured, not the communications networks, which buckled. What held was the smaller things. The neighbor with the candle, the nurse who said the doors are open, the pastor who said we have room, the retired soldier who opened his barn to 12 strangers, the 9-year-old girl who told a British soldier from Leeds that nervous and scared are the same thing. Those things held.
And now we have our conclusion. The full accounting, as promised in the Secretary of Defense's message, came 28 hours after the start of this operation. It revealed the following: a coordinated cyber attack of unprecedented sophistication, traced to a non-state actor operating out of multiple countries, including those within Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, had simultaneously compromised the operational systems of the Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Reserve's payment clearing systems, and the nuclear command and control verification infrastructure. Not the weapons themselves, which remained secured by physical safeguards, but the authentication systems, the keys, metaphorically speaking. Faced with an unacceptable risk of either inadvertent launch authorization or complete governmental paralysis, the President, in consultation with the Joint Chiefs and the National Security Council, invoked a classified mutual assistance provision within the NATO alliance treaty, one whose existence had never been made public, and requested that Allied military forces establish a physical security perimeter over the most vulnerable northeastern command infrastructure, while domestic cybersecurity teams, assisted by Allied technical units, worked to restore system integrity. The operation lasted exactly 71 hours in total, from first troop crossing to last withdrawal. NATO forces did not advance beyond the perimeter line established at 21 hours. Not a single shot was fired in anger throughout the entire operation.
The final death toll from the 71-hour crisis was 89 confirmed deaths. Let that number stand for a moment. 89 lives lost, every single one of them to the indirect consequences of the event. The accidents, the cardiac events, the fires, the cold, the chaos. Not one to a bullet. 643 individuals were hospitalized with injuries over the course of the crisis. All hospitals remained operational throughout. Portland Harbor reopened 72 hours after closure. All airports returned to normal operations within 5 days. The power grid was fully restored across New England within 60 hours of the initial outages. The cybersecurity teams, American, British, Canadian, French, and German technicians working in relay shifts in secured underground facilities in Virginia and Pennsylvania, successfully rebuilt and hardened the compromised authentication systems within 59 hours of the crisis beginning. The President addressed the nation 30 hours after the operation began, standing in a room that looked slightly unfamiliar. It was identified as an alternate command facility in West Virginia, not the Oval Office, and spoke for 41 minutes. The speech, which laid out the full facts of the cyber attack and the NATO response, was watched by more simultaneous viewers than any broadcast in recorded American history.
The longer-term consequences were real and significant. The cybersecurity breach triggered the largest overhaul of American digital national security infrastructure since the establishment of the Department of Homeland Security. A joint NATO-US Cyber Command task force was made permanent, with rotating Allied personnel embedded in American command systems as a mutual security guarantee. 4 countries outside NATO, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and New Zealand, were invited to join the task force under a new framework. Congress passed, in a rare bipartisan supermajority, the Digital Sovereignty and Infrastructure Protection Act, which allocated $480 billion over a decade to hardening federal digital systems. The political consequences were profound as well. The revelation that a president had authorized foreign troops on U.S. soil, even consensually, even under extraordinary circumstances, triggered a constitutional debate that would not fully resolve for years. 3 separate congressional investigations were launched. 2 cabinet secretaries resigned. A new set of protocols for invoking the classified NATO mutual assistance provision were written, debated, and ultimately codified in law, removing the decision from a single executive and requiring multi-branch authorization.
The communities most directly affected, the towns of Vermont, the border counties of New York, the coastal communities of Maine, recovered in their own time and in their own way. The dairy farm in Highgate Springs went back to milking cows. The hardware store in Johnson received payments, sometimes cash, sometimes checks, sometimes bags of vegetables, for months after Frank's open-door night. The church gymnasium in St. Johnsbury, where 200 strangers slept on cots, became a regular community gathering space. The pastor later said that more people had come to use that gymnasium in the year following the crisis than in the previous 10 years combined. People remembered, he said, that they were neighbors. The teacher in Swanton received a letter from the parent of every child in her class. One letter read simply, "You kept the lights on. The world did not end. The institutions bent, and in the bending revealed their fractures. But they held." The story of those 71 hours would be told and retold, not primarily as a story of governments or armies or geopolitics, but as a story of what ordinary people did in the dark when the systems they depended on went quiet. They opened their doors, they made coffee, they handed out candles, they said, "Take what you need, we have room, this is not the end."
Humanity stabilized, not because the institutions saved it, though they, imperfectly and at great cost, ultimately functioned. Not because any army or government or alliance performed flawlessly. None of them did. Humanity stabilized because it is constitutionally, stubbornly, almost irrationally disposed to do so. Because nervous and scared are the same thing, and people chose to say that truth out loud to each other across kitchen tables and church gymnasiums and apartment building lobbies, in the dark, in October, in the first 24 hours of something that had no name yet. The world was left changed. The word unprecedented would be used 10,000 times in 10,000 different languages in the weeks that followed, and it would be accurate every single time. The breach in the sense of American invulnerability, geographic, technological, governmental, did not heal cleanly. It left a scar. But scars are not wounds. They are evidence of survival. I am Alex Mercer.
And I am Sierra Lane. We have been on air for 24 hours. We are going to take a breath now. But before we do, I want to say this to every person who has been watching throughout this broadcast. You did not watch passively tonight. You stayed present with something terrifying and real, and you reached out to us, to your neighbors, to strangers on the internet, because that is what human beings do. You tried to find each other. You tried to make meaning. You tried to hold on. In 71 hours, NATO forces withdrew. In 60 hours, the lights came back on. In 24 hours, the count of those lost stood at 89. None of that is adequate. None of it erases the 41-year-old in Burlington who was taken by the dark too soon, or the 2 elderly people in Maine who lost their warmth in the night. None of it makes the fear that you carry tonight smaller, retroactively. But the world continued, and you were in it. You stayed. We're Silent Waves. Good night.